They told her she was worth nothing. They laughed at her pay stub. In a cold courtroom in downtown Manhattan, a shark lawyer and an arrogant ex-husband thought they had won the easiest victory of their lives. They called her financially unstable. They mocked her $12 an hour job. They thought they were crushing a helpless single mother. But they didn't know who she really was. They didn't know that the woman sitting quietly in the corner, wearing a thrift store blazer, was the sole signatory on a bank account that could buy the entire law firm 3 times over. This is the story of how a billionaire heiress let the court humiliate her, just so she could deliver the most brutal, satisfying revenge in legal history. Watch until the end, because the look on the judge's face is priceless. The air in courtroom 4B smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, but to Eleanor Vance, it smelled like impending doom. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency, casting a pale, sickly pallor over the mahogany furniture. Eleanor sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She was wearing her best suit, a charcoal grey ensemble she had bought at a Goodwill in Queens for $12. She had ironed it twice, but she could still see the faint ghost of a stain on the left lapel. She hoped Judge Harrison wouldn't notice. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. It was a party. Gavin Mercer, her ex-husband, leaned back in his leather chair with the ease of a man who owned the room. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Eleanor's car. He whispered something to his lawyer, Marcus Sterling, and the two of them chuckled. Marcus Sterling. The name alone struck fear into the hearts of New York's middle class. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't just win cases. He annihilated the opposition. He was a man who billed $200 an hour and wore a Patek Philippe watch that he checked ostentatiously every 5 minutes, as if Eleanor's poverty was wasting his valuable time. "Order," Judge Harrison said, his voice bored. He was a man in his 60s with thick spectacles and a reputation for hating domestic disputes. He shuffled the papers on his bench. "We are here to finalize the custody arrangement and financial support regarding the minor, Leo Mercer. Mr. Sterling, you have the floor." Marcus Sterling stood up. He didn't walk. He glided. He buttoned his jacket with a crisp snap. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice smooth like velvet poured over crushed glass. "This case is tragically simple. It is a matter of stability. It is a matter of mathematics." He walked over to the witness stand where Eleanor was seated, terrified. He looked at her not with hatred, but with pity, which was worse. "Ms. Vance," Sterling said, holding up a piece of paper between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "This is your W-2 form from the last fiscal year. Is that correct?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Speak up, please, for the court reporter," Sterling commanded gently. "Yes," she said, louder. "And according to this document," Sterling continued, turning to face the gallery, "your gross annual income, before taxes, was $28,400. Is that correct?" A ripple of murmurs went through the small audience. Gavin smirked, inspecting his manicured fingernails. "Yes," Eleanor said. $28,000, Sterling repeated, letting the number hang in the air. "You work as a junior archivist's assistant at the city library. Is that right?" "I organize historical records," Eleanor said, a flash of pride in her eyes. "It's important work." "I'm sure it is," Sterling sneered. "But does this important work allow you to provide a private education for Leo? Does it allow you to live in a neighborhood with a crime rate lower than the national average? Does it allow you to pay for health care?" "I have Medicaid," Eleanor argued, "and Leo is happy with me. He loves our apartment." "Your apartment," Sterling laughed. He walked back to his table and picked up a photograph. He projected it onto the screen in the courtroom. It was a picture of her building. It was an old brick walk-up in a rougher part of the Bronx. There was graffiti on the side door. "Your Honor," Sterling addressed the judge. "My client, Mr. Mercer, is the Vice President of Sales at Horizon Tech. He earns upwards of $400,000 a year, excluding bonuses. He lives in a gated community in Westchester. He has set up a trust fund for Leo. He has hired a live-in nanny with a degree in child psychology." Sterling turned back to Eleanor, closing the distance between them. He leaned in, his cologne, something expensive and musky, filling her nose. "Miss Vance, let's be honest. You are drowning. You are buying groceries with coupons. You are one flat tire away from bankruptcy. To grant you custody would be negligence. You simply cannot afford to be a mother." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Cannot afford to be a mother. Gavin let out a short, audible laugh. "She can barely afford to be a person," he muttered, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Objection." Eleanor's lawyer, a frazzled, overworked public defender named Sarah Jenkins, stood up. Sarah was 26, eager and completely out of her depth. "Counsel is being argumentative and insulting." "Sustained," Judge Harrison sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mr. Sterling, stick to the facts." "The facts are, Your Honor," Sterling said, spreading his arms wide, "that Miss Vance is destitute. She is financial dead weight. My client is willing to offer her, shall we say, a generous stipend. $500 a month, in exchange for full custody and her relinquishing all parental rights. We believe this is the only way to ensure the child isn't raised in squalor. $500. It was an insult. It was a crumb thrown to a starving dog. Eleanor looked at Gavin. He winked at her. A cold, soulless wink. He didn't want Leo because he loved him. He wanted Leo because he didn't want to pay child support. He wanted to win. To Gavin, people were possessions. "I won't sign," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but clear. "I won't give up my son." Sterling sighed, shaking his head theatrically. "Your Honor, if the defendant refuses to see reason, we move to request a full financial audit. We believe she may be hiding debt. We want to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she is financially insolvent." "Order," the judge said. "Ms. Vance, do you have any other sources of income? Any assets not listed?" Eleanor looked down at her hands. She thought about the heavy, leather-bound binder sitting in her tote bag under the table. The binder she had promised herself she wouldn't use unless it was life or death. She looked at Gavin's smug face. She looked at Sterling's predatory grin. "No, Your Honor," Eleanor lied. "I live on my salary." "Then God help you," Judge Harrison muttered. "Court is adjourned for recess until 2 p.m. At that time, I will issue my ruling on custody." The gavel banged. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Gavin walked past Eleanor as he left the courtroom. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "You should have taken the 500, Elle," he whispered. "Now you're going to lose him, and you're going to end up on the street." He laughed and walked out, Sterling trailing behind him like a loyal Doberman. Eleanor sat alone in the empty courtroom. Her hands were shaking. She reached down and touched the tote bag at her feet. She could feel the weight of the binder through the canvas. "It's time," she thought. They wanted to talk about net worth. Let's talk about net worth. To understand why Eleanor Vance, a woman worth billions, was being mocked for a $20 haircut, you have to understand the story of Silas Thorne. Silas Thorne was not a celebrity billionaire. He wasn't Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. You didn't see him on Twitter. Silas was old money. He was the kind of wealthy that owned the land the banks were built on. He made his fortune in steel in the 1950s, then diversified into shipping, rare earth minerals, and quiet, massive real estate acquisitions. Silas was also Eleanor's grandfather, but the world didn't know that. Eleanor's mother, Silas's only daughter, had run away from the Thorne estate at age 19 to marry a jazz musician. Silas, a hard, unforgiving man, had cut them off. Eleanor had grown up loved, but poor. She knew she had a rich grandfather, but he was just a myth, a boogeyman in a castle she never visited. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 22. Eleanor was left alone, working through college, meeting Gavin, falling in love, and realizing too late that Gavin was a narcissist who only loved the idea of a pretty wife, not the human being. Then, 6 months ago, a letter arrived. It wasn't a standard envelope. It was thick, cream-colored vellum with a wax seal. It was delivered by a private courier who waited for her to sign for it. Silas Thorne was dead, and he had been watching her. Eleanor remembered the day she went to the reading of the will. It wasn't in a lawyer's office. It was in a private library in a townhouse on the Upper East Side. The executor of the estate was a man named Arthur Pendergast, a man so old and wrinkled he looked like a tortoise in a suit. He regretted it, Pendergast had told her, his voice dusty. Every day. He watched you from afar, Eleanor. He saw you work double shifts. He saw you put yourself through school. He saw you marry that regrettable man, Mr. Mercer. He watched me struggle? Eleanor had asked, tears in her eyes. And he did nothing? He wanted to see what you were made of, Pendergast said. Silas believed that character is forged in fire. If he gave you the money too young, it would have ruined you. But he saw you leave your husband. He saw you fight for your son. He saw that you are good. Pure. Pendergast had opened the portfolio. He left you everything, Eleanor. The trust, the properties in London, Tokyo and Zurich, the shipping fleet, the art collection. Eleanor had stared at the bottom line. It was a number with so many commas she had to count them twice. 4.2 billion, but there was a catch, a clause, the humility clause. For a period of 6 months after my death, Silas had written in his own shaky hand, you must not reveal this inheritance to anyone outside of the executors. You must continue to live as you are. You must face your demons, specifically your ex-husband, without the shield of my money. If you can survive the fire, you deserve the gold. That 6-month period ended today, literally today, at noon. Eleanor checked her watch as she sat in the court cafeteria, picking at a dry sandwich. It was 12:15 p.m. The clause had expired. She took out her phone. She dialed a number she had saved simply as Arthur. Miss Vance? Pendergast's voice answered immediately. Arthur, Eleanor said, her voice hardening. I'm in the courthouse. The recess is over in an hour. How is it going? They are destroying me, Eleanor said. They are mocking my salary. Gavin is trying to take Leo because I'm too poor to raise him. Ah, Pendergast said. She could hear the smile in his voice. Excellent. Excellent? It means they have walked right into the trap, my dear. When your enemy is making a mistake, don't interrupt him. Let him commit to the narrative that you are destitute. I need the papers, Arthur. I need the full disclosure. The binder I have is just the summary. I need the certified proof of funds. I need the property deeds. I am already en route, Pendergast said. I am in the town car. I have the entire legal team from Thorne Enterprises with me. We are 3 blocks away. The legal team? Miss Vance, you are the head of a multinational conglomerate now. You don't walk into court with a public defender. You walk in with an army. Eleanor felt a shiver go down her spine. It wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline. Arthur? Yes, madam. Bring the red binder, the one with the acquisition targets. The acquisition targets, but we are focusing on the custody case. I know, Eleanor said, looking across the cafeteria where Gavin was laughing loudly, pointing at her while talking to a colleague. But I've decided I don't just want custody. I want to buy the company he works for, and I want to fire him. There was a pause on the line. Then a dry chuckle. Very good, madam. We will see you in 45 minutes. Eleanor hung up. She took a bite of her sandwich. It suddenly tasted like victory. She stood up, smoothed her cheap skirt, and walked toward the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. The tired eyes, the frizzy hair. She reached into her bag and pulled out a tube of lipstick. It was a deep, blood red. She applied it carefully. Gavin Mercer thought he was fighting a sheep. He was about to find out he was locked in a cage with a lioness. The clock on the wall ticked over to 2:15 p.m. The sound was amplified in the silence of the courtroom. Judge Harrison returned to the bench, looking as though he had enjoyed a heavy lunch and was ready to wrap this case up quickly. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at Eleanor, who was sitting alone at her table. Her public defender, Sarah, was nervously shuffling papers, looking defeat in the eye. Across the aisle, Gavin and Marcus Sterling were practically vibrating with victory. Gavin had already loosened his tie slightly, a sign that he considered the work done. All rise, the bailiff droned. Be seated, Judge Harrison said. We are back on the record for Mercer versus Vance. Mr. Sterling, do you have any closing remarks before I issue my ruling on custody? Sterling stood up. He didn't even bother to button his jacket this time. He treated the courtroom like his living room. Briefly, Your Honor, Sterling said, strolling toward the center of the room. We have established that Ms. Vance earns poverty wages. We have established that she lives in a high-risk zip code. We have established that she cannot provide the lifestyle my client's son, Leo, is accustomed to. Sterling turned to look at Eleanor. He sneered. The law is about the best interest of the child, and it is in the best interest of Leo Mercer to be raised by a father who is a vice president, a leader, and a provider. Not a mother who scraps by. Frankly, Your Honor, leaving a child in her care is a gamble, and this court should not gamble with a child's future. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. The judge nodded, picking up his gavel. Ms. Jenkins, anything to add? Sarah, the public defender, stood up shakily. Your Honor, a mother's love isn't measured in. Save it for the hallmark card, Gavin interrupted from his seat, laughing. Mr. Mercer, silence, the judge barked, though he didn't look angry. He looked tired. Ms. Vance, I am prepared to rule, based on the financial evidence presented. Wait, Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. She didn't stand up. She remained seated, her hands resting calmly on the table. Judge Harrison peered over his spectacles. Ms. Vance, you are represented by counsel. You should let her speak. My counsel is changing, Your Honor, Eleanor said. She checked her watch. Right. Now. Boom. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a heavy, authoritative thud. Every head in the room turned. Gavin twisted in his chair. Sterling frowned. The judge froze. Walking through the doors was Arthur Pendergast. The elderly man moved with a surprising vigor, his silver cane tapping rhythmically on the floor. But it wasn't Arthur who stopped the breath in Gavin's throat. It was the 5 men walking behind him. They were dressed in identical, immaculately tailored black suits. They carried leather briefcases that looked like they cost more than Eleanor's car. They didn't look like normal lawyers. They looked like sharks that ate other sharks. They moved in a V formation, flanking Arthur like a phalanx of Roman soldiers. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The air pressure seemed to drop. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Harrison demanded, though his voice wavered slightly. "Who are these people?" Arthur Pendergast stopped at the gate, separating the gallery from the well of the court. He bowed his head slightly. "Apologies for the interruption, Your Honor," Arthur said. His voice was old, but it carried the weight of a century of authority. "I am Arthur Pendergast, senior partner at Thorne, Pendergast, and Roth. I am entering my appearance as lead counsel for Ms. Eleanor Vance." Sterling let out a scoff. "Thorne, Pendergast, and Roth? Never heard of them. This is a delay tactic, Your Honor. And frankly, Ms. Vance can't afford a parking ticket, let alone a firm with 3 names." Arthur turned his head slowly to look at Sterling. He looked at him the way a lion looks at a buzzing fly. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said softly, "you haven't heard of us because we do not advertise on bus benches. We do not handle traffic violations or domestic squabbles. We handle international mergers, sovereign debt restructuring, and the estate management of the ultra-wealthy." Arthur signaled to the man on his right. The associate stepped forward and placed a heavy document on the defense table. Then the man on the left stepped forward and placed another. Then a third. They were building a wall of paper in front of Eleanor. "We are substituting in for the defense," Arthur said to the judge. "And we have a motion to dismiss the plaintiff's financial claims on the grounds of gross inaccuracy." Gavin whispered loudly to Sterling, "What is going on? Who is paying for this?" Sterling looked nervous for the first time. I don't know. Maybe she found a pro bono charity case." "This is highly irregular," Judge Harrison said, looking at the army of suits now occupying the defense side. Sarah, the public defender, looked relieved and quickly gathered her things to make room, scuttling away to the back bench. "It is irregular," Arthur agreed, "but so is the accusation that Ms. Vance is destitute. In fact, Your Honor, if we proceed with the assumption that Ms. Vance is poor, we would be committing perjury." "Perjury?" Sterling stood up, his face reddening. "My client's financial analysis is flawless. She makes $12 an hour." "She made $12 an hour," Arthur corrected. "As of 12:02 p.m. today, her financial status has evolved." Arthur walked over to Eleanor. He didn't treat her like a client. He treated her like royalty. He pulled out a chair for her to stand. "Madam," Arthur said, "the floor is yours." Eleanor stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at Gavin. He looked confused, sweaty, and small. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, "Mr. Sterling asked for a financial audit. He wanted to know my net worth. I am ready to provide it." "This is ridiculous," Gavin hissed. "She's bluffing. She's probably got a scratch-off lottery ticket for 10 grand. Sterling ignored him. He was staring at the briefcase one of Arthur's associates had just opened. He saw the letterhead on the documents inside. Thorne Industries. Sterling's face went pale. He knew that name. Everyone in high finance knew that name. It was the kind of money that didn't just buy houses, it bought senators. "Your Honor," Arthur Pendergast said, approaching the bench with a single thick file. "Mr. Sterling claimed that Miss Vance could not afford to raise her son. He claimed she is unstable. I would like to submit into evidence Exhibit A, the probate conclusion of the estate of Silas Thorne." "Silas Thorne?" Judge Harrison repeated. His eyes widened behind his glasses. "The steel magnate?" "The same," Arthur said. "Miss Vance's grandfather." A pin drop could have been heard in the room. Gavin's mouth fell open. "Grandfather?" She said her grandfather was a farmer. She lied, Arthur said simply, not looking back. To protect herself from fortune hunters. A wise decision, considering her choice of husband. Arthur slid the paper across the bench. Miss Vance is the sole beneficiary of the Thorne Trust. As of noon today, full control of the assets has been transferred to her name. The judge picked up the document. He read the first page. He flipped to the second. He stopped. He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his robe, put them back on, and looked again. "Mr. Pendergast," the judge choked out. "Am I reading this figure correctly? Is this billions?" "With a B, Your Honor," Arthur said crisply. $4.2 billion in liquid assets, stocks and bonds, plus a real estate portfolio valued at another $1.5 billion. The courtroom erupted. "Objection!" Sterling screamed, though he didn't know what he was objecting to. This is fabricated. It's a forgery." "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am looking at a certified bank letter from the Bank of Zurich and a notarized federal tax release. Unless you are accusing the Swiss government of forgery, sit down." Sterling collapsed into his chair. Eleanor walked slowly toward the center of the room. She stood directly in front of Gavin. "You said I was drowning," Eleanor said, her voice calm. "You said I was one flat tire away from bankruptcy." Gavin looked up at her. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a greedy, desperate glint in his eyes. "Elle," Gavin stammered. "Elle, honey, why didn't you tell me? My God, we're rich. We can—" "We?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "There is no we, Gavin. We are divorced, remember." But spousal support," Gavin looked at Sterling. "Marcus, get on this. She has money now. I'm entitled to alimony. I supported her for 3 years. Sterling shook his head, looking defeated. "The prenup, Gavin. The one you insisted on." Eleanor laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "That's right," she said. "When we got married, you made me sign a prenup because you thought I was after your pathetic $400,000 salary. You waived all rights to my future assets to protect your fortune. You played yourself, Gavin." The judge cleared his throat. "It seems the financial argument for custody is null and void. Miss Vance clearly has the means to provide for the child." "More than the means," Arthur interjected. "We have already enrolled young Leo in the St. Jude's Academy for Gifted Children. We have purchased a townhouse in Tribeca with a dedicated nursery wing, and we have hired the former head of security for the governor to ensure his safety." Arthur turned to Sterling. "Compare that to your client's rented condo in Westchester and his, what was it, a nanny with a psychology degree?" Sterling rubbed his forehead. He knew when he was beaten. "Your Honor, we request a recess to re-evaluate our position." "Denied," Judge Harrison said, slamming the gavel. "I've heard enough. Custody is awarded to the mother, Ms. Vance. Mr. Mercer will have visitation rights every other weekend, supervised, pending a review of his living situation." "Supervised?" Gavin shouted, standing up. "I'm a vice president. I'm a respected businessman. You can't treat me like a criminal." "Sit down, Mr. Mercer," the judge warned. "I won't sit down," Gavin yelled, his face purple. "This is a fix. She's buying the court. She's—" "Mr. Mercer, one more word, and I hold you in contempt." Gavin slumped back down, fuming. He glared at Eleanor. "You think you've won? You think money makes you better than me? I'm still the VP of Horizon Tech. I still have a career. You're just a lucky girl with a dead grandfather." Eleanor smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted fresh meat. She turned to Arthur Pendergast. "Arthur," she said, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Give me the red binder." Arthur smiled. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a binder bound in bright crimson leather. "What is that?" Gavin asked, his eyes darting between Eleanor and the book. "This," Eleanor said, flipping it open, "is a list of companies my grandfather's firm was looking to acquire before he died. He liked to buy distressed tech companies, companies with bad leadership, companies like Horizon Tech." Gavin's face went from purple to ghost white. "No," he whispered. "Horizon Tech is a publicly traded company," Eleanor said, reading from the page. "Market cap is 300 million. Small change." She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, if we are done with the custody ruling, I have some business to attend to. I need to make a phone call to the board of directors at Horizon Tech." "You can't do that," Gavin squeaked. "I can," Eleanor said. "I own 51% of the voting stock as of 10 minutes ago." She held up her phone. A transaction confirmation was on the screen. "Arthur bought the controlling stake while we were arguing about child support," Eleanor explained casually. "Why?" Gavin whispered. "Why would you buy my company?" "Because," Eleanor leaned in close, so only he could hear, "I don't like the way the vice president of sales treats women. I think it's time for a restructuring." "Court is adjourned." Judge Harrison banged the gavel, hiding a smile behind his hand. The drive from the courthouse to the headquarters of Horizon Tech took 20 minutes. Eleanor rode in the back of a black Rolls-Royce Phantom that Arthur had waiting at the curb. Gavin had to take an Uber. Eleanor didn't go home to change. She wore her $12 thrift store suit. She wanted them to see it. She wanted them to know exactly who was firing them. When she arrived at the glass and steel tower of Horizon Tech, the lobby was already in a panic. News travels fast in the digital age. The stock ticker in the lobby showed Horizon Tech shares skyrocketing, mostly because a mystery buyer had just swallowed the majority of the volume. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe, who had once rolled her eyes at Eleanor when she came to pick Gavin up for lunch, looked up. Her face went slack. Behind Eleanor stood Arthur and the 5 men in black suits. "I'm here for the emergency board meeting," Eleanor said. I don't have you on the list, Ms. Vance," Chloe stammered. "Mr. Mercer is on his way. He called and said, 'Mr. Mercer works for me,'" Eleanor said, walking past the desk. "He just doesn't know it yet." She took the executive elevator to the 40th floor. The boardroom was chaos. 6 older men in grey suits were shouting at each other. The CEO, a man named Robert Sterling, no relation to the lawyer, but just as arrogant, was pacing the head of the table. "Who is this Thorne estate?" Robert was yelling. "They can't just host a hostile takeover in the middle of a Tuesday." The doors opened. Eleanor walked in. The room went silent. "Gentlemen," Eleanor said. She walked to the head of the table. Robert stood there, blinking. "Excuse me, miss," Robert said. "This is a closed meeting. You're Gavin's wife, right? Or ex-wife? Look, Gavin isn't here. You need to wait in the lobby." "Actually, Robert," Arthur Pendergast said, stepping out from behind Eleanor, "she needs to sit in your chair." "Excuse me?" Arthur placed a single sheet of paper on the mahogany table. "Notice of majority ownership. Ms. Vance represents the Thorne interest. She controls the board, effective immediately." Robert looked at the paper. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at her cheap suit. He looked at the faint stain on her lapel. "You?" Robert scoffed. "The librarian?" "Archivist," Eleanor corrected. "And yes, me." She pointed to the door. "Robert, you're sitting in my seat. Move." It was a test of dominance. Robert hesitated. He looked at the other board members. They were all looking at their phones, seeing the news alerts confirming the takeover. None of them moved to help him. Slowly, Robert packed up his laptop and moved to a side chair. Eleanor sat down at the head of the table. The leather chair was warm. It felt like justice. "Now," Eleanor said, clasping her hands, "let's talk about the culture at this company, specifically the sales department." Just then, the boardroom doors burst open. Gavin Mercer ran in. He was sweaty, his tie was crooked, and he was out of breath. He looked wild. "You can't do this!" Gavin screamed, pointing a finger at Eleanor. "You can't come in here and play boss. I built this department. I bring in the revenue." "Ah, Mr. Mercer," Eleanor said coolly. "You're late. This is insanity." Gavin looked at Robert. "Bob, tell her. Tell her she's crazy." "Shut up, Gavin," Robert muttered, looking at the floor. "Mr. Mercer," Eleanor said, opening the red binder. "I've been reviewing your expense reports for the last 3 years. Arthur?" Arthur stepped forward. "We found significant irregularities. Dinners listed as client meetings that were actually dates with women who were not your wife. Travel expenses to Cabo San Lucas for conferences that don't exist." Gavin turned pale. That's standard accounting. Everyone does it." "Not at my company," Eleanor said. She stood up. "Gavin Mercer, you are terminated for cause, effective immediately. You will receive no severance package. Your stock options are frozen, pending an investigation into corporate fraud." "You can't," Gavin whispered. "I have a mortgage. I have a Tesla payment." "You should have thought about that before you offered me $500 a month," Eleanor said. "Security?" 2 burly guards appeared at the door. "Escort Mr. Mercer out of the building," Eleanor ordered, "and give him a box for his personal items, a small box." Gavin looked around the room. His colleagues, men he had drank scotch with, men he had laughed with about his nagging wife, refused to meet his eyes. They were terrified. They knew a new queen had been crowned, and they didn't want to be next. "Elle, please," Gavin begged as the guards grabbed his arms. "Please, I'm Leo's father. And that is the only reason I'm not suing you for emotional distress," Eleanor said. "Goodbye, Gavin." They dragged him out. His screams of, "I'm the vice president," echoed down the hallway until the elevator doors dinged shut. Eleanor looked around the table at the terrified board members. "Now," she said, opening the next file, "let's discuss the abysmal lack of maternity leave in this company. We're making some changes." The victory at Horizon Tech was sweet, but as Eleanor would soon learn, a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. And Gavin Mercer, coupled with Marcus Sterling, was a hydra of desperation and greed. 1 week had passed since the boardroom massacre. Eleanor had moved out of her drafty Bronx walk-up and into the Thorn penthouse on 5th Avenue. It was a place of quiet luxury, high ceilings, marble floors, and a view of Central Park that looked like a painting. For the first time in years, Leo was sleeping in a room that didn't hear the sirens from the street. He had a playroom filled with educational toys, not second-hand plastic blocks. But the silence was broken on a rainy Tuesday morning. Eleanor was in her home office, reviewing the financials for a new literacy charity she was founding. Arthur Pendergast was sitting opposite her, sipping Earl Grey tea. "The transition is smooth," Arthur was saying. "Horizon Tech stock is up 12%. The market loves the new ethical leadership initiative you announced. Firing Gavin and the old board was seen as a necessary purge." "It wasn't just business, Arthur," Eleanor said, looking out the window. "It was cleansing. I feel like I can finally breathe." "Madam?" The intercom on her desk buzzed. It was the doorman. "There are 2 gentlemen here to see you, a Mr. Mercer and a Mr. Sterling. They say they have legal papers to serve." Eleanor froze. Arthur set his teacup down, the china clinking softly. "Send them up," Eleanor said, her voice icy. "Are you sure?" Arthur asked. We can have security remove them." "No," Eleanor said, standing up and smoothing her silk blouse. "If they are here, they think they have something. Let's finish this." When Gavin and Sterling stepped off the private elevator, they looked like ghosts of their former selves. Gavin hadn't shaved in days, his eyes were bloodshot, and his suit looked slept in. Sterling, usually the picture of arrogance, looked frantic. He was holding a thick legal document like a weapon. "What do you want?" Eleanor asked, not offering them a seat. "We want it all back," Gavin spat, his voice cracking. "We know about the clause, Elle. We know about the morality clause." Eleanor frowned. She looked at Arthur. Arthur remained impassive, his face a stone mask. Sterling stepped forward, regaining some of his old slime. "We did some digging, Ms. Vance. Your grandfather, Silas Thorne, was a man of strict principles. I pulled the original trust filing from the probate court archives. Section 14, paragraph B." Sterling opened his document and read aloud, his finger shaking. "Should the beneficiary use the assets of the Thorne Trust for acts of personal malice, petty vengeance, or the destruction of personal enemies rather than the betterment of the estate, the trust shall be immediately dissolved and all assets donated to the Red Cross." Sterling looked up, a triumphant grin stretching across his face. "You bought Horizon Tech solely to fire your ex-husband," Sterling said. "You admitted it in the boardroom. You said, 'I don't like how the VP treats women.' That is personal malice. That is vengeance. By the letter of your grandfather's will, you have forfeited the fortune." Gavin laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "You're broke again, Elle. It's over. The Red Cross gets the money, and you go back to the library." Eleanor felt a cold knot in her stomach. She looked at Arthur. "Is this true?" Arthur stood up slowly. He walked over to Sterling and took the document from his hands. He adjusted his spectacles and read the paragraph. "It is a standard clause," Arthur admitted. "Silas hated bullies." "Exactly," Gavin shouted. "And she bullied me. She bought my company just to crush me." "So," Sterling pressed, "we are prepared to file this motion immediately. The probate judge will freeze your assets by this afternoon. Unless—" "Unless what?" Eleanor asked. "Unless you settle," Sterling said. "We want $500 million in cash. Transfer it to an offshore account today. And we forget we ever found this clause. You keep the rest. Everyone wins." It was blackmail, pure and simple. Gavin looked at Eleanor with hungry eyes. $500 million, Elle. That's plenty for me to start over. Come on, don't be stupid." Eleanor looked at the two men. She saw their greed. She saw their fear. And suddenly she realized something. They didn't understand Silas Thorne, and they certainly didn't understand her. "Arthur," Eleanor said quietly, "did I buy Horizon Tech to destroy Gavin?" "You certainly enjoyed firing him," Arthur noted dryly. "But was that the reason?" Eleanor asked. She walked over to her desk and picked up a file. "Mr. Sterling, you seem to have done your research on the will. But did you do your research on the company?" She threw the file at Sterling's chest. He fumbled to catch it. "Read the Q3 projections," Eleanor commanded. Sterling opened the file. These are spreadsheets." "Horizon Tech was insolvent," Eleanor said sharply. "Under Gavin's leadership, the sales division was hemorrhaging money. You were faking the numbers, Gavin. You were cooking the books to keep the stock price up." Gavin went pale. "You can't prove that." "I own the servers now, Gavin. I have every email. I have every falsified invoice," Eleanor said. She stepped closer to them. "I didn't buy the company to destroy you. I bought it to save the jobs of the 4,000 employees you were about to drive off a cliff. I bought it because it was a distressed asset that I could turn around. That is not malice. That is business." Arthur Pendergast smiled. It was the first time Eleanor had seen him truly grin. "Furthermore," Arthur added, stepping in for the kill, Section 14, Paragraph C of the will states, "The determination of malice shall be made by the executor, whose decision is final." Arthur tapped his own chest. "I am the executor, Mr. Sterling, and in my judgment, Ms. Vance's actions were the definition of astute corporate rescue. She cut out a cancerous tumor, Mr. Mercer, to save the patient." Sterling's face fell. He reread the document in his hand. He had missed paragraph C. "So," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you have no case. You have no blackmail material. But what you do have, Gavin, is a looming indictment for securities fraud." "Fraud?" Gavin squeaked. "Cooking the books is a federal crime," Eleanor said. "My auditors are handing the files over to the SEC this afternoon." Sterling dropped the papers. He looked at Gavin, then back at Eleanor. He backed away towards the elevator. I didn't know about the fraud," Sterling stammered. "I was just representing my client. I'm leaving." "Marcus, you can't leave me," Gavin yelled. "You lied to me, Gavin," Sterling shouted, pressing the elevator button frantically. "I'm not going to jail for you." The elevator doors opened, and Sterling fled, leaving Gavin standing alone on the marble floor of the penthouse. The silence that followed was heavy and final. The collapse of Gavin Mercer wasn't the sudden, fiery explosion he had always feared in his nightmares. It was a slow, agonizing suffocation. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, each one stripping away a layer of the vanity he had worn like armor for his entire adult life. In the weeks following the boardroom confrontation, the SEC investigation descended upon Horizon Tech like a swarm of locusts. Because Eleanor's new leadership team cooperated fully, handing over hard drives, emails, and the red binder of evidence, the company itself was spared the death penalty. They paid a fine, restructured, and moved on. Gavin was not so lucky. He became the radioactive scapegoat, the face of the fraud. The plea deal his lawyer managed to negotiate kept him out of a federal prison cell, but the cost was absolute. The court seized his assets to pay restitution to the shareholders he had misled. The house in Westchester, with the manicured lawn, gone. The Tesla Model S, repossessed in the middle of the day while his neighbors watched from behind their curtains. His investment portfolio, liquidated. But the hardest blow wasn't financial, it was social. The friends he had drank scotch with, the colleagues he had golfed with, the women he had flirted with, they all vanished. His phone, once buzzing every 3 minutes with notifications, became a silent brick of glass and metal. He was toxic. In the cutthroat world of New York business, failure is forgivable, but fraud is a contagion. 6 months later, winter had settled over the city. Eleanor Vance sat in a booth at Joe's Coffee, a small, foggy-windowed cafe in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn. It was a place she knew well. Years ago, when Gavin was just a junior associate and she was a student, they used to come here because it was the only place that offered free refills. It was where they had planned their future. It was where she had told him she was pregnant with Leo. Now, she sat there as a billionaire, surrounded by the smell of roasted beans and damp coats. Her security detail, a man named Henderson, sat 2 tables away, reading a newspaper, but watching the door like a hawk. Eleanor wore a simple cashmere sweater and jeans. She didn't wear diamonds. She didn't need to. She carried herself with a quiet, unshakable peace that was worth more than any jewel. The bell above the door chimed. A gust of freezing wind blew in, followed by a man who looked like a shadow of Gavin Mercer. He was thinner. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was greying at the temples, and overdue for a cut. He wore a suit jacket that Eleanor recognized. It was an Armani from 3 seasons ago, but the cuffs were fraying, and there was a missing button. He looked around nervously, spotting her in the back booth. He walked over, his posture slumped. The swagger was gone, replaced by a jittery, desperate energy. "Elle," he said, his voice raspy. "Thank you for meeting me. I didn't know if you would come." "Sit down, Gavin," Eleanor said softly. She signaled the waitress. "Coffee?" "Please," Gavin said. "Black. I'm cutting back on sugar. Dental copays are expensive." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry cough. He sat down, wrapping his cold hands around the mug when it arrived. For a long moment, he just stared at the steam. "How is Leo?" he asked, not meeting her eyes. "He's thriving," Eleanor said. "He started piano lessons. He has a recital next month." Gavin flinched. "A recital. I used to say I'd be there for his first recital." "You can still be there, Gavin," Eleanor said, "if you get your life together. Visitation is still open, provided you pass the drug tests and show proof of residence." "Residence?" Gavin scoffed bitterly. "I'm living in a studio apartment in Jersey City, Elle. It's above a laundromat. The whole place vibrates when the spin cycle starts. I'm working at a call center doing outbound sales for solar panels. Me, the vice president of Horizon Tech." "You were the vice president," Eleanor corrected him gently. "Now, you're just a man starting over. There is no shame in honest work, Gavin. I worked in a library basement for 5 years, remember? You used to make fun of the dust on my clothes." Gavin looked up, a flash of his old anger igniting in his eyes before quickly dying out, extinguished by his desperation. "I know," he whispered. I was arrogant. I see that now." He leaned across the table, his eyes pleading. "But this punishment doesn't fit the crime, Al. I'm drowning. I have legal fees. I have back taxes. I can't breathe." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had come to do. "I have an idea. A business proposition. There's a boutique consulting firm in Connecticut. They don't care about the SEC ruling. They want my expertise. But I need a buy-in. I need capital to become a partner." "How much?" Eleanor asked, her face unreadable. 50,000, Gavin said quickly. Or maybe 75, just to be safe." "It's nothing to you, Elle. You have billions. You make that in interest every hour. It's a drop in the bucket." He reached out, trying to touch her hand, but pulled back when he saw Henderson shift in his seat nearby. "Please," Gavin begged, his voice cracking. "For old time's sake, for the father of your child, help me get back on my feet. I'll pay you back, I swear." Eleanor looked at him. She looked at the man who had once stood in a courtroom and told a judge that she was financial deadweight. She remembered the sneer on his face when he offered her a stipend to disappear. She remembered the way he had tried to erase her role as a mother because her bank account was empty. She felt a profound sense of sadness, not for herself, but for him. He still didn't understand. He still thought money was the solution to a rot that was deep in his soul. "You want a check?" Eleanor asked. "Yes," Gavin breathed, hope flooding his face. "Yes, please." Eleanor reached into her purse. She pulled out a sleek, leather-bound checkbook and a fountain pen. Gavin watched her hand move, his eyes hungry. He was likely already calculating. A new apartment, a new suit, a way to buy his way back into the club. Eleanor wrote carefully. She signed her name with a flourish. She tore the check from the book with a sharp rip that echoed in the quiet cafe. She slid it across the wooden table, face down. "Gavin," Eleanor said, her voice serious, "I want you to take this, and I want you to remember the day in court, the day you thought you had won." "I remember," he said, reaching for the paper. "I was a fool. Thank you, Elle. You're saving my life." He flipped the check over. His smile froze. His eyes widened, then narrowed in confusion. He brought the paper closer to his face, as if he couldn't read the handwriting. "Pay to the order of Gavin Mercer. Amount $500. Memo. Charity." "Five," Gavin stammered. $500? He looked up at her, his face flushing a deep, humiliated red. "Is this a joke? You missed the zeros. You meant 50,000, right?" "No, Gavin," Eleanor said, capping her pen and placing it back in her bag. "I didn't miss anything." $500, he hissed, his voice rising. "This is an insult. I can't start a business with this. This barely covers my rent." "It's not for a business," Eleanor said, her voice turning cold and hard as steel. "It's for you to survive. Do you remember the offer you made me, Gavin? Through your shark lawyer?" Gavin went silent. The memory hit him like a physical blow. "You offered me $500 a month," Eleanor reminded him. "You stood in front of a judge and said that was a generous amount for a woman of my station. You said it was enough to keep me from squalor." She leaned in closer. "If it was enough for the mother of your child, then surely it is enough for you." Gavin stared at the check. His hands shook uncontrollably. He wanted to rip it up. He wanted to crumble it into a ball and throw it in her face. He wanted to scream that he was a vice president, that he was a king, that he deserved more. But he couldn't. He looked at his frayed cuffs. He thought about the empty refrigerator in his studio apartment. He thought about the overdue electric bill. He needed that $500. He needed it more than he had ever needed anything in his life. Slowly, painfully, Gavin folded the check. He put it in his breast pocket. The action was the final surrender of his ego. "You're cruel," he whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "No, Gavin," Eleanor said, signaling Henderson that it was time to leave. She stood up, looking down at him one last time. "I'm not cruel. I'm just giving you exactly what you said I was worth. I'm letting you live by your own standards." "Goodbye, Eleanor," he choked out. "Goodbye, Gavin." Eleanor walked out of the cafe and into the crisp winter air. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She walked toward the waiting Rolls-Royce, where the driver held the door open for her. As she settled into the soft leather, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo's piano teacher, sending a video clip of him practicing his scales. He looked happy. He looked safe. Eleanor smiled. The billions in the bank were security, yes. But the real victory wasn't the money. It wasn't the penthouse or the private jets. The real victory was the freedom to walk away from people who tried to make her feel small. She watched the city pass by through the tinted window. Eleanor Vance had survived the fire, and she had come out not just gold, but diamond, unbreakable, brilliant, and finally, truly free. And that is the incredible story of Eleanor Vance. It's a powerful reminder that the person you mock today might be the person holding the keys to your future tomorrow. Gavin Mercer measured people by their wallets, and in the end, he found out that character is the only currency that really matters. He lost his family, his career, and his dignity, because he couldn't see the value of the woman standing right in front of him. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about underdogs getting the ultimate revenge, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. What would you have done if you were Eleanor? Would you have given Gavin the money? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.